All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this really exciting webinar on fast and scalable DFIR using LimaCharlie. I'm going to be your host today, Eric Capuano, part of the permanent LimaCharlie team here. Also, quite an extensive background in security operations, digital forensics, and incident response. I've been a practitioner for many years, and I also teach such topics as DFIR. So I'm actually really excited to kind of demo and showcase to you today some of the kind of newer and some existing features part of the platform that are very, very strong enablers and force multipliers for digital forensics teams specifically, because it's a really difficult problem to solve. And anyone that's been in the field for longer than a year or two knows this. The challenges around being an IR firm are pretty serious because not only do you have the processes that you have to get in place, the communication channels that must be opened quickly, and then of course the technology, right, that supports and enables you. And oftentimes it's very difficult to get any one of those channels perfect, even more so to get them all perfected so that you're able to scale and streamline DFIR operations. Well, obviously, process and sort of, the non-technical approach is certainly, a case-by-case basis. But on the technology side, this is something that I think LimaCharlie can help move the needle in massive ways to help streamline kind of the technical side of getting deployed, getting real-time telemetry, so you're getting visibility into what's going on inside an environment. But also, equally as important, is being able to get that retroactive, look at what happened inside of a network, right? Because once again, in IR, right, we're usually parachuting into an environment after the thing has already happened, right? So something blew up. It could have been a ransomware event, could have been some sort of just long dwell time style compromise. So we're showing up after the fact, and sadly, as most of you probably know, you're showing up probably with very little information to go on, right? Maybe there may be some log aggregation, maybe, but in most cases, that's not even going to be the case. So, you're not going to have a scene to query against. You may have very little tooling in the environment to kind of start to build your investigative story or timeline. So we're going to act as if we have none of these things, right? We're going to drop into an environment. We're going to take a look around. We're going to get real-time visibility so we can start to explain what's happening now. Like, is the threat actor still present? And then also, how do we get that historical data? Because clearly we need to know, well, how did this begin in the first place? So we're going to have to go back into historical evidence sources, acquire those sources, and then talk about ways that we can automate the processing and handling of that data as well. But really, at the end of the day, what's the main goal? The main goal is find out, is the intrusion still unfolding? Is there an active adversary in this environment? And how can we effectively eradicate with minimal damage, right? Get the threat actor out, stop the bleeding, and get this business back up and running. So that's some of the capabilities and sort of the approach that we're going to be talking about here today. I do want to invite you to please fire away if you got questions or any topics you want to bring to my attention or to the other attendees. Feel free to fire those off into the chat. I'll do my best to keep an eye on that chat window as we're diving through the demo today. So let me go ahead and bring up a little screen share, because I've got quite a few things I want to show you all today. I hope that we have time to get through it all, because lots of moving parts here. All right, now, something I certainly want to start with. This is going to sound so simple, yet it's probably one of the most differentiated pieces of LimaCharlie as an IR enablement tool. The fact that we have our own cross-platform EDR sensor, right? So we cover your major OSs, Windows, Mac, and Linux. We also cover Chrome-based devices as well as Chromium-based browsers, which is kind of unique. So you're not having to necessarily worry about bringing third-party EDR, which oftentimes comes with really steep price points and long-term contract agreements with those vendors. We don't necessarily operate at all like that. We're basically an on-demand, pay for what you use, basically the same way you look at a cloud provider like AWS or GCP. So you could literally scale up 5,000 EDR agents for a day and scale them right back down. And you only paid for that day's worth of EDR consumption, right? Which is a very, very flexible thing to have as an IR firm who's literally doing engagements that look very much like that. spinning up a handful or dozens or hundreds or thousands of agents for the period of maybe a few days, and then spinning them right back down. But another really cool thing, and if you're in an IR firm that sells retainers, right? So IR retainers, you certainly want to pay attention to this feature. You have the ability to pre-deploy our EDR agent onto tens, hundreds, or thousands of endpoints and put those agents to sleep, right? So basically they're doing nothing. They're not shipping telemetry. They're literally just sitting there dormant until the moment you come in and activate them. Now think about the process improvement that exists there, because one of the biggest hurdles that IR teams face, especially IR firms that are outside of their customer organization, is you get the phone call, hey, look, we have an incident. We need your support. We need you to come in. We need you to figure out what's going on. Generally, from the moment you get that phone call to the moment you're bringing in telemetry and finding bad guys, that process can take many hours if you're lucky. It oftentimes takes days, because you're going to have to now communicate to those the IT teams at those customer orgs and say, okay, here's our agent. We need you to get it mass deployed. And then, the IT team may have some pushback or may not know how to effectively deploy it rapidly. And so you're going to doing this back and forth thing. So how much better of a position are you in if you could pre-deploy from the moment that IR retainer is signed? Go ahead and pre-deploy this agent now in a time of peace, and know that we can activate those agents in a moment's notice. Literally, when they call you on the phone and say they have a problem, you're activating the agents before you're even off the phone, and the IR has now begun, right? So the sleeper capability is what we call that, is incredibly easy to use. So for instance, if this was one of my customer organizations here, and I've got a handful, a dozen, however many workstations, and it doesn't matter. It could be hundreds of thousands if I'm dealing with a customer that size. I can literally come in here and put that agent to sleep with a simple tag. And I can automate that as well. I'm just showing you kind of the manual way of doing that. If I apply that LC sleeper tag, this agent goes to sleep. It does remain connected to our platform, but it's otherwise doing nothing else in this environment. It's not going to be causing any performance issues or anything goofy like that, because it's literally sitting there dormant, idle. So a really convenient way to kind of stay inside a customer network, even in times of peace, and be able to rapidly activate those sensors to get into IR mode, if you will. Hang on, just checking on the chat here. Jeffrey, you're saying you're having some issues with audio. Is anyone else having an audio issue? I want to make sure I get that resolved if that's the case. Anybody able to give me a thumbs up, maybe thumbs down, just make sure. Okay, yeah. Either way, no worries. This is being recorded. So if anybody's having any kind of connectivity issues, things like that, you'll be able to come back and watch the recording. Awesome sauce. Okay, so that was just a little bit of just kind of, hey, cool gee whiz feature. The sleeper capability, very, very powerful. But folks, let's get into it now. So we're going to go through an actual intrusion here, because what I've got is I've got a series of systems here checking in. You can kind of see a handful of Windows systems in here: ACC 01, 02, 03, 04, 05. So maybe we're dealing with some sort of accounting firm, right? And they've got a handful of systems that we've onboarded, we've deployed our agents, and unfortunately, this accounting firm has experienced the breach. Okay, so the really good thing about this is the moment we hand them that little installer and they install that agent, those systems check in, telemetry starts flowing in real time, and that's EDR telemetry. That's also Windows event logs. Right, so I'll just kind of jump into one of these systems just for a moment here and kind of show you some of the real-time capabilities that I have once that sensor is online and checking in. Right, so my IR folks, you'll already come to appreciate the fact that I can very quickly at a glance get an eye on things like auto runs entries. Right, these are some of those things that are set to start automatically at boot, which could help me maybe work out possible persistence mechanisms. I can also audit all the drivers that have been loaded by this system, because as many of you also know, probably one of the most prominent real-time threats we're seeing right now to the Windows operating system in terms of significant compromise, right? Meaning like serious stuff like rootkit type behavior. Where we're seeing that today is primarily with the LOL drivers. I'm sorry, the BYOVD, right? Bring your own vulnerable drivers. So looking at LOL drivers, so these are legitimate drivers that have known vulnerabilities that allow an adversary to compromise the system at the kernel level, right? Scary stuff. So we're not only able to audit those drivers, but we even have, for instance, a built-in lookup. I'll bring that up here really quick. We have a built-in lookup capability for those LOL drivers. So if you want to be detecting this in real time, we could simply write a detection rule that looks at every code identity event involving a driver, and it checks it against a list of known vulnerable drivers, right? So I can kind of get that, from this point forward, let me know if you see one of these. But if I wanted to do a kind of a manual audit or assessment, it's as simple as just enumerating the drivers on a per system basis or across the fleet, right? But anyway, lots of other cool things that we can do with this sensor. I have full access to the file system, which, as you know, is imperative in an IR. When I finally start to uncover where potential samples may be, malware and things of that nature, I certainly want to go get my hands on it, right? So knowing I have full access to the file system of each of my monitored systems is very useful. Same thing goes with network activity. I can see in real time all the processes that have either open or established or listening ports, that kind of thing. And I even have a little bit of metadata, such as the hashes of those processes. So just some quick at-a-glance information, right? Installed software, you name it, all kinds of good stuff. Running processes, probably an important piece of data to have as well. Now, what I love about the way that we show you these running processes is we're already giving you some tidbits, some metadata that you probably care about, such as you can see the little green check mark here is indicating that process is digitally signed, which most of my IR folks already know what that kind of tends to tell me. If it's digitally signed by a trusted publisher, I'm just going to say it's probably not malware. There's an overwhelming percentage there of, malware is not likely going to be digitally signed. I'm not saying never, but very unlikely. So just the presence of that green check mark can and oftentimes sort of exonerate a process, as at least the process itself is not malicious. But for my folks that have done a lot of investigations, you know that, of course, legitimate processes can be abused. So I'm not saying it's completely benign, I'm just saying that the binary itself is not likely to be malicious. But I can very quickly, at a glance, just scan the list of running processes of a system that I already suspect maybe something funny is happening on. And just by leveraging that green check mark, I can quickly reduce this data set and say, look, I'm not as worried about all these signed processes. I would sure love to know about this unsigned SVC host.exe though, because I know SVC host is a normal system process. This is part of Windows. It's a very common system level process that you see. So it would be very unusual for it not to be signed. And furthermore, just by simply looking at the path that process was launched from, I know immediately there's something not right here, right? So we've got an SVC host running out of a Windows temp location, and the command line arguments are furthermore a little unusual if this was in fact a legitimate SVC host, right? Because you can kind of see just by scrolling up a little bit here, all your other legitimate SVC host processes are accompanied by this very predictable -K command line argument, followed by a service group name, followed by then a service name. And so there's a very conventional way of seeing SVC host called, and this is not it, right? This is a very, one of these is not like the others, right? So just at a glance, again, we're not doing anything super sophisticated here. We're just putting eyes on something, looking for things that kind of stand out, but don't worry, we're going to get into the more powerful capabilities here in just a moment. But I also do want to showcase to you the power of the timeline, right? So once again, the main purpose of this EDR agent is to start getting real-time telemetry off of this endpoint. I need to know everything that's happening, second by second, every process that launches, every network connection that's made, right? Every registry key that is written to, deleted, or modified, right? I want to know everything that's happening. And so those events are streaming in real time. You can verify that too. If you just want to kind of see the events as they come in, the live feed right here is showing me exactly that, a real-time feed of those events that are streaming in, which is not generally where I would go to consume this, but it's a nice sanity check to see, okay, events are flowing. The timeline is primarily where I'm going to spend my time really understanding what's happening here, because it's presented to you just like a forensic examiner or an incident responder would expect. A chronologically ordered sequence of events of everything happening on this system, all kind of in one order. Now, I do want to call out something kind of interesting or useful. While EDR telemetry is going to be predominantly what you would expect to see here, because that's what we've installed on the system, as I mentioned, we have native support for Windows event logging as well. And so I think that's pretty important. and I hope you'll agree, and I'll tell you why I think that this is like a must-have. This is table stakes. Is notice I see a Windows event log right here, 4625, right? And many of you already know what that's telling me. We've got a failed logon of some kind, right? And I can see that logon type 3, so network style logon. Okay, and I've got multiple of these actually. If I kind of filter here just shortly, just for a moment, I got a lot of those. A lot of 4625s. So you already know where we're going with this, right? Looks like possible brute force activity. And I imagine, yep, as you can see here, that's coming from the internet somewhere. So that's probably not good for business. But also seeing that alongside the EDR telemetry is helpful because I can kind of confirm, like for instance, with this network connection event, that SVC host is receiving connections right now on port 3389. Right there, sandwiched between failed logons. Okay, there's no surprise there what's happening. Those failed logons, it's against the RDP, the exposed RDP service on this system. So, hey, that's probably something we should know about, right? We've exposed RDP to the internet, and that's not great, right? So, lots of cool things we could do with that. But anyway, I want to move on to a more of an IR-centric approach here. So that's kind of just an idea of some of the things we can do with this sensor. I think it's very awesome that we can get some very quick kind of triage answers of what's going on an endpoint. And then we have that timeline streaming all of those events. But okay, folks, at the end of the day, I'm not just trying to collect telemetry just to collect telemetry, right? We're doing it to detect adversaries. I want to know, are there threat actors in this network right now? Now, I go over here to my detections tab. Let me show you. I don't have any. And the reason I don't have any is because I deployed this organization with a blank slate. Got no detection rules of any kind because I didn't want to clutter up our detections here. Because I wanted to show you just how easy it is to get instant alerting on anything that's happening in this environment without having to write a single detection rule. So if you don't already know about our add-ons marketplace, okay, there's one really, really awesome add-on in here that is almost a no-brainer for an IR team using LimaCharlie. And I say this because it's basically a way to get a phenomenal rule set in place instantly without having to write any. Now, notice there's several different rule sets here to pick from. And there's a few in here that I'm like, hey, sure, definitely Sigma, right? Most of you are probably familiar with the Sigma rule set, open source, available on GitHub, and very comprehensive. Well, one of the downsides with Sigma is it tends to be a bit false positive prone. So if I'm in an IR, in a pinch, and I just need a rule set, I might use Sigma. But the reason I might not is because I don't want to be overwhelmed with false positives either, right? So one of my favorite rule sets to leverage when time is of the essence is the Soteria rule set, which is a premium rule set maintained by the awesome team at Soteria, which is a managed detection response provider over on the East Coast. And their rule set is just too good not to talk about. So what I'd like to do in an IR situation, because yeah, sure, it's going to cost me 50 cents a sensor, right, to turn this on. That's okay. I'm going to be in this environment for 3 or 4 days. Not a big deal. That's a pretty cheap bar or a pretty low bar in order to get a production ready rule set just boom, deployed and ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and flip that on because I want to show you just how quickly we're going to get value out of this rule set. Because remember, just to kind of set the stage and remind you of where we're at and what we're doing there, we have gone ahead and deployed a handful of agents inside of a suspected compromised environment. But telemetry is now flowing, right? So if there are threat actors moving, if there's bad things happening, this rule set's going to help us start to work that out. So I've enabled that rule set, which means a whole lot of Soteria rules are kind of flooding into my organization right now, which means telemetry will begin immediately getting assessed by each and every one of those rules. And I would be surprised if we didn't start seeing some detections here very shortly. But now, while we wait on that, the next thing I want to show you, because this is another just kind of force multiplier, is our built-in Yara scanning capability, right? So if I've got a collection of Yara rules, which, let's be honest, you can get hundreds of these just right off of GitHub, right? One of my favorite repositories, by the way, if you don't already know about it, is Google Chronicles Threat Intelligence Team, GCTI, has probably some of the most high fidelity Yara rules for 2 very common attack tools, Cobalt Strike and Sliver. And I just say, like, folks, if you have not yet encountered one of these tools in an IR, It's not a matter of if you will, it's when you will. Like these are just too common, too prominent. So these are good rules to kind of be familiar with. So let's say I wanted to ingest or import all these phenomenal Cobalt Strike rules right into LimaCharlie and then be able to automatically and continuously scan for Cobalt Strike in the environment. I can absolutely do that, right? So I'll kind of show you what that might look like. So I can come in here and I can define, individual YARA rules. Like maybe I just want to bring in Florian Roth's God mode rule, which is actually a really cool rule that Florian gave us. That's kind of like the one rule to rule them all, right? I just said the word rule way too many times. But basically what he said was this rule here will detect almost all instances of very bad things, because it's kind of looking for those universally not good things, right? Like reflective being, reflective or injection in memory and that kind of stuff, right? It's looking for just kind of keywords, VSS admin, delete shadows, the things that you're like, almost anytime you see this, it's going to be bad. That's what this YARA rule contains. So I've got that one loaded in my org here. And I've also got a kind of generic, just one size fits all Cobalt Strike rule. But of course, I can add as many of these as I want to for Sliver or Meterpreter or any other common attack tools that we may encounter. All sorts of different web shells and things like that can be found with YARA. So once these YARA rules are loaded into my organization, I can use them multiple different ways. Now, one of the first and easiest ways I'm going to use it is I'm going to set up a background YARA scanner. And what this means is the agents, my EDR agents, will now continuously and always scan the endpoints in the background using as little CPU as possible. We're talking like 1% or less for this signature. So if, for instance, I just want to look for Cobalt Strike all day, all the time. Why wouldn't I, right? Then I've just simply created this background scanner that's using my Cobalt Strike rule, scanning, for instance, Windows systems, but I could also include Linux, Mac OS, or what have you. And if I wanted to, I could narrow that in on specific tags, but no, why not? Let's just all Windows systems, right? And save that. And now that it's back here in the background, it's continuously and always running. But it's also being very cognizant of resource utilization. So it's not going to cause endpoint performance issues. It's very kind of just low and slow and in the background. But every so often, especially in an IR, I like to mash this button right here and say, no, I want to trigger an immediate scan right now, for instance, of all Windows systems, which I'll use this sensor selector query right here. So basically, all platform equals Windows. I want to run a scan for Cobalt Strike in memory. Whoops, clicked on the docs. We're going to run a scan for Cobalt Strike in memory. We're just going to kick that off because I need to know what's happening right now, right? So we'll kick that off and go back to our detections page and see what's going on in this environment. All right, so remember a few minutes ago, we enabled the Soteria rule set because once again, I'm an incident responder. I don't have time to write a bunch of detection rules. I just want to use a really rock solid rule set right out of the gate so I can focus on finding adversaries. So we've got an alert, okay, just one. But one of the good things about the Soteria rule set is if you get an alert on this rule set, it's worth looking into, right? We're not going to be inundated with false positives with the Soteria rules. So I'm a huge fan of that. So if I take a look at this one, I want to get an understanding of what's going on here. Why did I get an alert about this? So what it's telling me is run DLL32 is connecting to a public IP address. Okay, so apparently that's not a great thing. All right. And so furthermore, I can see very clearly the original event that triggered this alert. So as you can see here, we've got run DLL32, and it is making outbound network connections. Let's take a look and see where. Okay, so this 70.34.248.30 address. All right. Now, it does take a little bit of familiarity with Windows system processes to be able to quickly come to the conclusion that this shouldn't be happening. Generally, we don't see run DLL32 connecting out to the internet. And that's why there's a Soteria rule for it. There's also a Sigma rule for it. So it's a very well-known anomaly. It's something that is pretty universally understood to be not okay, not normal. So that's why we're getting an alert. So of course, I've got this IOC right here, this IP address. So if I know this is an unusual or anomalous activity, then I'm going to suspect that this IP address is probably one worth looking into. Right, so we'll kind of take note of that, maybe plug that into our case notes as we're working through our investigation here. Now, something else that stands out to me is kind of strange. And again, I'm building on experience and just knowledge here, but the command line arguments here for the run DLL32 process also look a little unusual to me. And I'll tell you why that is. Right? Run DLL32 generally is used for one purpose. It's to run DLLs, right? Well, that often means that in the command line arguments for a run DLL32 process, I would expect to see the path to a DLL. I do not see that here. So that's actually two strikes against this, right? We've got run DLL connected to the internet, and it is missing the expected command line arguments that I expect to see with run DLL32. So there's a couple things a little goofy about that. But notice we've got a couple new detections. Whoa, maybe more than a couple new detections. Just seeing the value right away of that Soteria rule set now assessing every piece of telemetry that's coming in to this environment. There's a lot going on, right? So we saw our run DLL32 connected to the internet. We're seeing some additional things for who am I execution by a privileged user, right? So some of those very common adversarial things like trying to figure out what user they're running as or what groups they're members of and so on and so forth. Hey, no surprise here. We've got another offending run DLL32 process. So kind of correlating those two, right? I would say these are more than likely related. And no surprise to see another run DLL32 related alert for shell execution. So we're seeing run DLL32 spawning CMD to run those who am I commands. So a lot of these are based on related activity, but it's absolutely shining light on stuff that's not typical in a healthy environment, right? Now, I do want to focus in on one thing here really quick. So remember, we kicked off a Yara scan just a moment ago, a background Yara scan in our environment. And notice we have a hit right here, Yara detection in memory for the when Cobalt Strike auto rule on ACC04. That's probably not great, right? So that background Yara scan just threw us a quick win, right? So what it's showing me here is we have a hit on this process, which is run DLL32.exe. No surprise there, right? We've already got a bunch of alerts aiming at run DLL32. And it's telling me here the rule name that fired. So it's just the name of that Cobalt Strike rule that I added earlier. So we now have a pretty strong suspicion that we might be dealing with Cobalt Strike in this environment, okay? Which would further add some background on this run DLL anomaly that we're having. But I don't want to get too far in the rabbit hole of the love affair between Cobalt Strike and run DLL32. I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader, but it has a lot to do with why we're seeing what we're seeing here. But okay, I'm also interested in this right here. This is kind of interesting. So notice we've got something here for some PowerShell, some encoded PowerShell. So we've got some base 64 encoded PowerShell here, and we're capturing that here in the command line arguments of various different executions. Now, of course, you know that anytime we see stuff like this, absolutely love to carry that over to our good friends with CyberChef to get a better understanding of what this encoded command is actually doing. And this is actually a pretty telling output right here. So when I decode this base 64, right, and then I further decode it into UTF-16 little endian, which is what Windows is using, I can see the clear text version of that PowerShell command that's being run. And folks, this ought to make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, because what we're seeing is PowerShell being used to enumerate processes, but two specific processes in this case, MSMP ENG, which some of you may recognize as Microsoft Defender. It's also looking for Sysmon, which, if you don't already know, is a very powerful EDR-like agent from Microsoft, by the way, that generates EDR-like telemetry. So both of these things here would be very bad for an adversary. So no surprise that you see an adversary looking for the presence of these things. Now, you know why I love to find stuff like this? Is I just basically got a TTP from our adversary, right? One of their tactics, techniques, or procedures. This specifically is a procedure for enumerating countermeasures, right? Or defensive tooling on this system. Well, I would wager that this adversary is probably running the same command on every box that they land on. So this becomes a really interesting scoping item for me to find out how many systems is this threat actor on, right? Because I've got a pretty good feeling they're at least on the ones that I've got these alerts on, right? I would say definitely on the one I've got this yard detection on. But I do want to continue scoping to get a good, strong understanding of where else might this adversary be. So let me queue up a couple other things that I want to show you. But really quick, I do want to highlight some really awesome things that we can do in these detection rules, because folks, while the Soteria rules did a phenomenal job of finding adversaries quickly, right? None of those rules are actually going to take any action. They're just generating alerts. Well, you and I already know in an IR, right? That means you've probably got a threat actor in the network right now. And maybe they've done a little bit of damage, or maybe they've exfilled a little bit of data, but we don't know, is it about to get much worse, right? Did they ransomware one system over here and they're about to hit 48 over there, right? We need to be able to take instantaneous action. So I do want to show you some really cool things that we can do in our DNR rules. So like, for instance, ransomware mitigation. Almost always is this a concern in the middle of an IR, because just because they haven't been ransomed yet doesn't mean that's not coming, right? Maybe the threat actor is still gathering data and still zeroizing backups. And maybe once that's done, maybe then they move to the ransomware step. So I want to show you a more aggressive detection rule that's going to actually take action in this environment, because time is of the essence in a situation like this. So I can very easily write a detection rule that looks at all new processes in an environment, examining for specific command line arguments I definitely do not want to see, like vssysadmin, delete, shadows, often accompanied by /all or what have you. But you know what? That's enough for me right there. If I see an adversary trying to delete volume shadows, which I know is something that you could use to recover from a ransomware attack, there's a good chance that a ransomware attack is coming, right? So would I recommend running a rule like this in production every single day without better, crafting or tuning it? No, maybe not. But in an IR, absolutely. Because I'll tell you right now, I would bet your customer would be pretty happy knowing that you stopped an actual ransomware attack as it was unfolding. And this is going to be the command or a similar command that you're going to see in most ransomware cases. So I'm going to have a really aggressive rule that's not only going to kick out an alert, but it's also going to instantaneously terminate the entire process tree that offended this rule. So not only the process itself, but its parent and all descendants. So if a ransomware payload is what shelled out the vssysadmin to delete all the volume shadow copies, well, we're going to terminate it and everything below it right away. But hey, that's not enough, because if the adversary is on that box running a ransomware payload, we've still got problems, right? So I'm also going to isolate this machine on the network. I'm going to quarantine it right away. Now, again, you're probably thinking, man, that's a pretty bold move, right? Like, I don't want to just start quarantining systems all over the network. No, generally you don't, right? In a production, healthy environment, I'd be extremely careful with a rule like this, because I don't want to cause network outages or issues based on maybe poorly crafted rules, right? Again, we're talking about, this is an emergency. Threat actor is here. They're in the environment, right? So if this is the difference between a fully ransomed environment and not, I think it's a risk worth considering at least, right? So I know I'm going to automatically isolate that system by quarantining it, which means it loses all network connectivity to anything but me at LimaCharlie. So I still have my command and control over that system. I'm still getting telemetry, but that system is no longer able to impact any other systems around it. And I'm also going to take a history dump from the sensor, which is just another way of saying, hey, look, we've just discovered something unusual happening on this box. I want to dump everything that you know about this system and ingest it right away, right? So it's just a way of basically turning on verbose mode right away, but historical with look back. Show me the last 2 hours of verbose mode on this system, because obviously something bad just happened and I want to know what led up to that point. But there's so many other really cool things that I can do in here, right? And again, I'm showing you these as very useful for an IR situation. Like, hey, we know that unsigned binaries are actually fairly uncommon these days, right? So what if I wrote a detection that looked at every file that was not signed, and it went ahead and just automatically checked the VirusTotal API? Why not? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's not going to be tons of these, right? I turned this on for about a day and got about 200 hits on it. Right? A free VirusTotal API key can handle that. You can get up with a free VirusTotal API key, you get up to 500 queries in a day. And in a small environment, I got 200 or so. So now if you get an enterprise VT API, let this thing rip, right? But it's not like I'm looking up every single file. I'm only looking up the unsigned ones because, again, those are likely going to be the malicious binaries, not the signed ones. So lots of other cool things that we can do in here, but let me press on. Let's go back and take a look at what's going on our endpoint, because I do want to pivot on one of the detections that we saw in here earlier. Like, for instance, that run DLL connection to an external IP. I kind of put a pin in that earlier, but I do want to go back and say, okay, if we're suspecting that this is a likely IOC, right, an indicator of compromise, that may very well be our attacker's command and control IP address, right? We got run DLL32 reaching out to it, and run DLL32 doing a lot of other shady stuff. So there's a really strong likelihood this is C2. So naturally, one of the first things I'd want to know is what other systems are talking out to this IP address, right? If this IP is bad, then any system talking to it is likely compromised. So I can run a very quick IOC search here across this entire organization, looking for everywhere that this IP has been observed, right? So it's giving me at first just a quick summary. How many times has it been seen in the past day, the past week, the past month, the past year? This is kind of neat because check this out. This tells me right here, this IP address is not normal for this environment because it has only been seen in the past day. So this is fresh, this is new, right? So probably want to know though, where has it been seen? So show me the locations you have seen this IP, because basically you're about to give me a list of systems that are in scope, right? So ACC3 and ACC4, and I get the first time it was seen and the last time it was seen on each of these systems. Now this is neat because what I can do there is I can click on this timestamp and let's see which one's the earliest. So 0446. So folks, right away, I know, at least from this one IP address, I know which system was the first one to get compromised because it's the first one that was ever observed talking to the C2 IP. So I'd go click on this timestamp and it's going to take me right to the timeline where that very first hit of this IOC showed up, and look at it. It's a DNS request. So that was the first time that we saw this IOC was in a DNS request made by this host at 0446 on the 7th. And how fun is that? I now have a domain name to match it with. So I've got now two IOCs. I've got the IP address, and I've got this really funny domain name, porkchopsandwich.net. Folks, rinse and repeat, right? I'm gonna search other DNS queries, because what if this IP address changes, but the domain name stays the same? I'm gonna rinse and repeat. I'm gonna continue scoping for all the IOCs that I'm able to find. Let's see. One other thing I wanted to call out, because it came in just a little bit afterwards, is the YAR detections. Remember, we saw the YAR detection here on ACC04, matching on run DLL32. However, shortly after that, one came in that we did not talk about. We've got one on ACC03 as well, matching a completely different binary, SVC host. Now, we saw that earlier accidentally. When we were looking at process listing on ACC03, remember, we saw this SVC host all the way down at the bottom, and it stood out because it was not digitally signed. It also stood out because it was sitting in Windows 10. Well, now it's coming up as another match on Cobalt Strike signature. So, okay, yeah, we're definitely getting a little bit more context about what's happening here. But okay, all right, I want to shift over and show you all one other really cool thing we can do. So if I'm suspecting, for instance, on ACC03, we were just seeing that hit on ACC03, where svchost.exe here is potentially Cobalt Strike. Let's say I wanted to do a little bit of, let's just say, poor man's reverse engineering here, right? Well, then I would go and take a look at ACC03, go back to that processes screen, scroll down, actually make this even easier. Just show me those SVC host processes so I don't have to scroll through all of them. So there's many of legitimate SVC host processes, but I know very quickly which one's the one I'm looking for because it's not signed and it's in C Windows 10. This is kind of neat. What I can do is a couple of things I can do is if I know this thing is bad, well, maybe I should just kill it right now. Yeah, that's not a terrible idea, but I'm still gathering information. I'm still gathering data. I want to gather intel about this adversary. So one thing I might do first is I might download all the strings from the process memory for that process, because with that, I'm able to craft additional signatures. I'm able to extract additional intelligence. And so that's what you see here, which I know may be a little tricky to see. I'll try to zoom in here, but basically this is the output of extracting strings from that SVC host process, which is kind of cool because what I'm able to do, if my zoom catches up with me here, it's about a 7 megabyte file, so bear with me. But what I'm able to do here is I'm able to extract possible IOCs. Like, let's see, I'm not sure you're going to be able to see this, and Zoom is lagging on me a little bit, but there is a named pipe right here among many other interesting strings that were pulled out of this process. Folks, these are IOCs, right? This named pipe, if you're able to make that out, it's MSSE-3758-server. Folks, you could Google that, and you're probably going to land on a Cobalt Strike YAR signature. Because that named pipe pattern is incredibly well known for Cobalt Strike. So it's a really juicy IOC. But there's so many other tidbits in these strings that would allow me to craft a very quick signature to kick off. Yeah, I see another good one in here. Umair called out the MS agent. Yes, that's another really well-known, really common sort of pipe naming convention that you see with Cobalt Strike. So but just showing you how easy it was for me to just extract the process strings from this bad process, because I'm going to get more intel. Right? I can also download the process executable itself, right? There's a long list of things I can do. I can examine the network connections, you name it, all kinds of good stuff here. Umair also had a question. He said, does YaraScan drop the .yar files on the endpoint? Absolutely not. That's a great question. And he made another good follow-up point, because some EDR agents will pick up on those files and detect them as malware. And that's exactly why we don't do that. So no, all of our Yara scanning and the signatures are kept only in memory, Umair. Now, I'm not going to say, if you have a really aggressive EDR agent also on the system, depending on how it's configured, it may get into the memory of the LimaCharlie agent and say, whoa, what is this? But I've never personally encountered that or heard of it happening. I'm just going to say it's not impossible, right? But it does not drop anything to the disk. It is purely doing this in memory, which is a lot cleaner, a lot quieter, right? So it's certainly a preferred way to go about it. All right, now, before I get too deep into this, I do want to show you one other really cool capability we have, and then I'm going to shift over to something entirely new and different. So, of course, the query console is another very powerful way to get some quick answers on things happening in this environment, right? I want to know over the last, for instance, 6 hours, 8 hours, what have you. Show me every process event, whether it's new or existing, where the command line contains that base 64 encoded PowerShell we saw earlier, the one for disabling Defender, right? Or not disabling, but looking for Defender, looking for Sysmon. But I want to show you some cool tricks we can do with the query console. Not only can I search the last 6 hours, the last 30 days, the last 365 days, I can also do some aggregation, right? So I can do some grouping and some counting, which is what you're seeing here. I'm basically grouping all instances of that command line argument, and I'm counting it by the path, command line, and host it was found on. So I can see, for instance, it happened 60 times on ACCO3, 36 times on ACCO4, only 7 times on ACCO2, and only 6 times on ACCO1. Okay, folks, this is interesting. I got 4 systems here, 4 systems showing the exact same command that we know our adversary likes to run. However, a moment ago, when I ran an IP address search for the IOC we knew about, only 2 systems came back. That's interesting, right? And I would say that's a pretty important sort of defining moment to recognize that threat actor can get a foothold on a system a number of different ways. It doesn't mean there's going to be direct C2 from that system to the adversary. They could simply be daisy chaining through a network. That's why we continue to scope. We continue to take all the data points that we know about, like that DNS query, or let's say another anomaly, like run DLL 32 execution, where the command line does not contain the path to a DLL. We saw that previously as one of our anomalies, right? I want to see everywhere that this is happening, because maybe it's normal. Maybe we see this across the whole network, right? I'm going to wager it's probably not the case. So what systems do we see this happening on? ACC 1, 2, and 3, right? Which are also, we're also part of the previous scope of our query as well. So again, seeing that same behavior on the same systems as some of our other anomalies. I can also use the query console to do a similar scoping based on that DNS information that we had earlier. Remember, we learned from that IP address, it was a DNS query for porkchopsandwich.net. So I'm just going to simply ask the question, show me every DNS request in this entire environment that had a response that involved, request that involved the word pork chop sandwich. It's a pretty unique name, right? And right away, I can see every system that made that request, and notice the queries vary a little bit here. Sometimes it's for porkchopsandwich.net. Sometimes it's for www.porkchopsandwich.net. But in every case, it was the same IP. That's good to know, right? There's no other IP addresses that are in scope here as IOCs. Looks like I've got the one. That's helpful. But again, just want to continue showing how I can kind of transform this data, right? So I'm doing a similar query here, but now I'm going to do some grouping and some counting. Which system had the most counts of these DNS queries, right? Which might give me an understanding of, which systems are going to be most substantially compromised. So we're actually seeing here that pork chop sandwich is used on 2 hosts and www is used on 2 hosts. So, okay, that's kind of interesting, but maybe not the juiciest query. But I'm just taking another slice at it here, querying on that IP address though, making sure there's no other domain names though that may also resolve to that IP address. And also which processes were doing these queries. Now this should come as no surprise, right? We've got run-dll32 making these queries. We've got svchost.exe in Windows 10 making these queries. So again, just showing a couple quick examples, folks, of some of the things that we can do here in our query console. But okay, I want to use the next 12 minutes to show off some things that I think are probably the more exciting new capabilities that we've got in the platform. So if you're not already familiar with Velociraptor, I would say you've been maybe living under a rock, because it's probably one of the most exciting open source DFIR capabilities that we've had in many, many, many years, if ever. And LimaCharlie natively, seamlessly integrates with Velociraptor. And let me kind of show you what we're able to do with that, because there's nothing better for digital forensics and incident response as a collection agent, as simply collecting artifacts, collecting files, collecting evidence off a system. Velociraptor is pretty much the best that there is out there for doing this. And again, I can remind you, the price tag is free as in free. So that's kind of legit. So what I'm able to do with the Velociraptor extension here is, if there's a particular data set I want to hunt across all my endpoints for instance, I want to get all running processes, which I'll just kind of show you here. If you wanted to take a look at what an artifact is going to do, I can say, first of all, show it to me. And that's going to give me the raw data that this artifact contains. So for instance, it's going to list processes and their running binaries. And if we look at the Velociraptor query language behind the scenes here, you can see that not only is it going to return a list of processes, it's also doing some authentic code information, some hashing. So it's giving me some really helpful metadata around that. So what I might choose to do is, I want to run this artifact against every single Windows system in the environment. I want to get all running processes, a snapshot right now of all running processes. Now, again, folks, can I have done this with LimaCharlie? Yes, I already showed you how. But if Velociraptor is your tool of choice, know that all of those Velociraptor artifacts you know and love can be run right here through LimaCharlie, right? So I can collect that artifact. It's going to kick off. I'll show you where I can get kind of a real-time view of those things coming in. In the extension Velociraptor sensor, I can get a real-time feed of all of those collections run across those endpoints. Excuse me. I can see the results inside of the collection, Windows Systems PS list. And inside, I'm going to have a list of all of those processes, all of the metadata around the authentic code of the processes. You have it. It's all here. But folks, here's the thing. This isn't generally where I'd want to look at this much data. This is a lot of data coming back from 10, 20, 150 systems, whatever. So I do want to show you one really cool capability that we have recently kind of introduced into our documentation. And it's the ability to send Velociraptor hunts somewhere else that's more friendly for an analysis, right? And so I'll show you here quickly where we have kind of demoed the ability to mess with Velociraptor hunts the same way you would use a Velociraptor notebook. We've implemented sort of a capability of outputting these hunts to Google BigQuery. By the way, folks, let me just show you where you can go to learn a little bit about this. You can very quickly kind of trace my steps here by searching. We've got a BigQuery doc, Velociraptor to BigQuery. Everything I'm about to show you is covered in this doc, right? So there might be a few moving pieces in here, but I do want you to just kind of know this is very well documented if you want to get hands-on with this. But essentially what I'm able to do is I'm able to send my Velociraptor hunt data now out to a BigQuery notebook, which would allow me to do some of those comfortable and familiar sort of stacking exercises and things like that against my data. So for instance, I want to know all of the executables that are running and group them up by their exe and command line. So basically just show me the rare ones. Show me the ones that only occur once or twice across all these systems, which might help me find, outliers, right? So let me kind of expand this up a little bit here. So you can kind of see here, because we have a count of 1 on many of these results, what that's telling me is it was unique. Now, several of these are our Velociraptor collection itself, so those are not going to be necessarily the interesting ones. But I imagine if I kept going here, something like this stands out a lot more easily, right? This Windows temp SVC host stands out very easily, and I did this indiscriminately across every one of these systems. I said, show me the rarest processes across these endpoints, and this one came back because it was only running on a single endpoint. However, out of however many I ran this hunt against, right? So as you can see here, we can kind of use SQL-like syntax here to ask some very specific questions of this data and get some very specific answers. I can also, for instance, draft a query that's going to show me all the processes, but with specific fields and columns kind of highlighted and shown to me here. And what that allows me to do is, for instance, write a statement where I just simply say where, let me see if I have my example here, so I'm not writing from memory. Let's see. I think we're going to go for a where authentic code is. I don't have the syntax in front of me, and I'm gonna fat finger this, and I don't want to do that. But basically, what I would do next, I would just bring my syntax from my notebook here. But what I would do next is just simply look for, show me all those entries where authentic code here is untrusted. Right, so filtering out all those signed binaries, just show me the unsigned ones. I imagine there's a really good chance we're going to fall on our interesting hits for that SVC host there that was out of place. Yeah, forgive me there. I had my notes in front of me and then I lost them, so I don't want to go off script here. But okay, so that's how we get more like Velociraptor notebook-like examples here. But one more kind of game-changing thing, and I've got about 5 minutes left that I can show you this. Now, folks, one of the other really powerful capabilities of Velociraptor, and easily one of my favorite things to use it for, is to pull triage acquisitions. Because remember, we gained phenomenal visibility into this breach the moment we deployed agents. I know what's happening as it's happening now. I still do not know what happened before I arrived. What happened a week ago? If this breach has been going on for a week or 2 or 3, I need to go as far back as possible. I need to get historical data, right? So this is where Velociraptor is going to come extremely in handy. One of my favorite artifacts to use against the compromised system is the Windows Cake Files Targets artifact. This enables Velociraptor to take a triage acquisition, meaning don't take a full disk image of this system. That's silly. I don't need to acquire 2 terabytes from this machine, when really I just need all of the most juicy forensic artifacts, the key artifacts, like the prefetch, the shim cache, the registry hives, the event logs, all those evidence of execution artifacts. That's all I really care about. Just get those things. That's basically what this is going to do. And I could simply say, hey, get that from all Windows systems, or I could say, no, just get it off of this one system here. Or I could use tags and say, the compromised tag. If you see the word compromised in a tag on a sensor, then that's the one I want to get. So there's no wrong way to do this, right? But I'll keep it simple. say platform equals Windows, and then take triage is the specific acquisition I want to take here, and I'm going to fire it away. What's going to happen the moment I click collect artifact is that LimaCharlie will dispatch Velociraptor down to the endpoint. It's going to execute a triage acquisition. It's going to gather probably multiple gigabytes worth of data off of each of these endpoints, and it's going to upload it right up to the LimaCharlie cloud, and it's going to store those right here conveniently where I can download them. But I'm going to show you something even better than that. I don't want to download these. I don't want to download 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 gigabytes if that's what these acquisitions end up being. I would much rather just automatically push them somewhere else for processing, right? Folks, really exciting proof of concept I want to share with you here. And we'll drop a link here to the GitHub. That's a really good question, Gord. Is there a max size for artifacts? There is, there might be. If there is, I haven't hit it yet. And I've sent multi-gig size files up. So I'll have to get back to you on that. But I know there's a max size on regular file acquisitions, but when you switch to get artifacts, it's a much higher limit if there is one at all. But good question. But I've never had a problem pulling back a triage acquisition. So that's generally what I'm hopeful for, is that I can get that acquisition file just fine. So we've got a proof of concept that I do want to show you about here that I think you will appreciate. And I'm just digging for my link here. So if I go back into our docs and simply search for Velociraptor, I'm going to pull up this Velociraptor doc right here. It's at the bottom of this doc. We've got a link to an open source project put together by Whitney Champion on our team. And what this does is this gives you step-by-step instructions on how you can deploy TimeSketch, which, if you don't already know, is a phenomenal open source forensic timelining collaboration tool maintained by the folks at Google. So the same folks that make Plazo, which we're also using Plazo here under the hood. So Plazo is, or log to timeline, will receive your triage acquisition, automatically process all the raw forensic evidence, and it's going to output that into a TimeSketch instance. So basically, all that historical data that I need to know, that happened in this environment before I arrived, has now been acquired with LimaCharlie, pumped automatically into my processing system, automatically processed, and now I've got forensic timelines here ready to go that my team and I can use to, annotate and document our findings. Say, hey, this is initial access, right? What have you? This is a phenomenal tool, and this proof of concept that I've brought up here on the screen literally walks you through step by step how to do this, folks. This is how you raise your IR capability to the next level. Looking for the ability to fully automate from start to finish the entire triage acquisition, forensic timeline generation, while you have real-time telemetry and detection streaming in, and the ability to take instantaneous action. Because now that I know about several IOCs in this environment, like for instance, a couple of different IP addresses, I just simply created a lookup here in LimaCharlie, and I'm going to add every IP address that I know is bad. I turn that on, and I'm going to get a compromise label against every endpoint that makes contact with that IOC. Same thing, for instance, with the, had one more in here. Oh yeah, the domain name, right? If I know that pork chop sandwich is up to no good, right? I'm going to write a really quick rule. And if I wanted to, I could get more aggressive with this rule. I know this is adversarial. I know this is bad. So maybe what I'm going to do is automatically isolate, quarantine that machine if I see this. But this is probably good enough to at least just get some real-time metadata when sensors are observed reaching out to these IPs or domains. They will automatically be appended with labels. Like you see right here, ACC04 has a yard detection in memory because my DNR rule applied that label. And here shortly, I'm going to have the compromise label on several systems because of the IP address and the domain name being observed. But just keep in mind the power of the automation you have at DNR to not only detect threats, but automatically take actions, and also the ability to send larger triage acquisitions to other processing pipelines that you might have access to. Well, folks, hey, that takes us to the top of the hour. We're about a minute over, forgive me. If you have any questions at all, please, I invite you to join us at slack.limacharlie.io. I'm Eric Capuano. I hang out in there all the time, so feel free, if you have any other questions, to fire them away. Thanks so much for joining me today, and have a fantastic rest of your week, folks.